years. I think y'all know that. I mostly spent, and I'm from the White Earth Reservation, which is in northern Minnesota, and I'm Anishnabee or Ojibway. I have spent most of my time fighting, I spent a lot of years fighting bad mining projects, uranium mines, coal strip mines, yeah. And then I ended up in Canada. I lived in Moose Factory for 6 years. I was married to a chief who recently passed, Randy Kapashizit from Moose Factory, and I ended up fighting dam projects, James Bay 2, and in each case, and I'll probably talk about this some tonight, you have a situation where we defeat a project, but you don't reduce the demand, and so they just move to another bad idea. And the indigenous communities, by and large, that are implicated or the prey, end up in a situation where they are still as at risk of, they don't have control over their economy. They don't have control over a lot, frankly. So I'm a rural development economist. That's my training. I thought about being a lawyer, but I realized I'd spend a lot of time getting my cousins out of jail for stupid stuff. So I'm not a lawyer. I'm a writer, obviously, and a journalist. Been at that for quite a long time. But my interest is largely in the questions, the larger economic questions and the questions of rural economies. How you gain control and how you keep them. And how you look at the same equation over and over. Of a mining company comes in with this number of jobs, and they talk about this as, or this, bad idea, essentially, one idea after another. And the economic analysis that is, I always say, which I think you guys are probably pretty hip to, is like, just if you keep repeating the lie doesn't mean it's true. So if you say, this is good for the economy, someone needs to deconstruct that argument. I'm sure Naomi Klein's going to do a fine job of that tonight. But at the same time, I look at it in these communities, and that's what you're looking at. If someone is saying, this is how many jobs, and this is, what works in this, system. And very few people, not enough people, we'll say, there's not enough deconstructing their analysis. Because their analysis is faulty. It's based on things like endless access to water, which it turns out that, it's finite. There's not more water, and what we have isn't theirs. Or, endless, or it's predicated on an overconsumptive, inefficient economy. Largely, an energy economy would be a perfect example. The U.S. Wastes about 57% of its energy between point of origin and point of consumption. Probably don't want to try to reboot that economy. They want to say renewables won't work, won't meet the present demand. I'm like, why the hell would you want to? It's so inefficient. It's so inefficient. And then, tribal communities, indigenous communities, end up having very little control of their economies, and on this smaller scale, they're looking at these same things. The DIA, Indian Affairs, or the BIA, whoever is coming in and saying, you got jobs. Look at this full-time employment opportunity with this new operation. And instead, there's no analysis of one, what they're losing, right, with their traditional economy or the wealth of it. There's no self-reliance. There's our analysis of how you get out of, the cycle. In the case, and I'll talk about this some tonight, but what I do on my own reservation, and I'm working on kind of more broadly in Indian country, is this question of, if you do an analysis of the local economy, on our reservation we analyzed food and energy systems. We found that we spend a quarter of our money on food and a quarter of our money on energy. And in both cases, in the case of food, we spend $8 million a year. And of that, $7 million is spent off reservation like that, at Walmart, Food Service of America, trucked in food from California or wherever, right? Totally inefficient, relationship to the broader industrialized food system, which, causes global climate destabilization and consumes too much fossil fuels, right? And and similarly with energy, we spend a quarter of our money on energy. And in both cases, it's all drained out of a community. The economic drain represents almost 50% of your economy. Any wealth you bring in, full-time employment or special jobs, it's gone. you know? And so instead of tackling the leak, they just want to bring in more jobs. No one wants to say, how about we quit leaking? You know, which is the answer, is quit leaking, because then you have some control. You know, you have control over your food economy, you have control over your energy economy, and you have basically, you know, meaningful self-determination, self-reliance. That's an essential, you know, part of the strategy. Then you add health and you know, and housing in there, which is easily added in. I mean, I'm just saying that the theoretical construct is what I largely work on, and that is applicable to pretty much any economy. It's not just, you know, tribal or indigenous communities. So that's what I work on. I've been at it for a long time, and I still fight mining companies. You know, communities call me up and say, would you come out here, and you know, and I'll go there. I just came back from a community in northern Michigan that's looking at their entire land bases leased by Rio Tinto Zinc. You know, and so I'm working to try to figure out what we can do. You have a question?
Yeah, just to build off of your comments on how you work on the theories of it, do you have any cases in mind where that theory has come into practice and it's been a real catalyst for hope in any reserve or community?
That's my community.
Yeah.
That's where I work. I live in a community and I work there. And then I, you know, broadly discuss this, but my reservation is in the process of relocalizing our food and energy economies. You know, first you start with the energy, and this is not rocket science to interview, you start with your efficiency issue. You know, the fact of how much you lose in your winter heating system. You put solar thermal on the south side of your walls, right? You understand what I'm saying, right? And then, you know, geothermal, if it's a new house, you can put that in there, and then you look at your electricity. In my case, I live in a reserve or reservation that has class 4, which is, you know, utility scale wind potential. Northern Plains Reservation. So that's what I'm looking at. I got one turbine, you know, it's a 75 kilowatt. I'm scaling to a 39.5 because of the law. And one
kilowatts per day, per hour, per.
I don't know what they call that. I mean, it's just like the production. So it produces enough for us fuel.
Okay.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Basically, for a school, a size for a school. I'm really interested in community wind.
Yeah.
I'm interested in utility scale because you got to deal with climate change. You got to scale up. But I'm really interested in communities being able to own and control
self-reliance.
Yeah, self-reliance, and in a meaningful way, you know. And so I just, for instance, this summer I hauled my sorry butt over to the Community Wind Energy Conference in Bonn, Germany, because all the intellectual capital's over there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not here, you know. I mean, there was some interesting people from Ontario at it, actually, who were looking at the same thing, but, there's one reserve on Manitou, an island that's put up a 2 megawatt, I think, 1.2 megawatt or 2 megawatt of wind. But, you know, that would be a really useful transfer of intellectual capital, is what Denmark has and what Germany has. Because it makes a lot of sense for our communities at scale so that you can fix it. You know, you don't need to import. I mean, the community, my favorite community is this community called Lowland that I haven't got myself over to yet. Lowland is in Denmark. It's an island, remote. The reason it's important in analysis is that, like, Canadian communities are remote too, right? Reservations are remote communities. We're not talking about places that are always grid-tied and have also been marginalized from the broader economic wealth. If you understand what I'm saying, an island in Denmark, right? And so they were going downhill, and they decided that they would use their intellectual capital to build wind turbines. And almost every wind turbine that's on the market today came out of Denmark. And they have, you know, very good wind, and in this island of Lowland, they produce 3 times more power than they can use. And it's all wind, pretty much. So I'm interested in this scale. And, you know, I'm interested in continuing. I believe, you know, and I think what I'll tell people today probably is what I usually say is you got to keep fighting these guys. You know, because you got to fight these guys just, you know, over and over and over. But at the same time, you better have a better plan. Don't just fight them, you have a better plan and actualize it, you know. Because, and we have to articulate our plan and say, this is what it looks like. This is what the future looks like without them. And, you know, don't be afraid, because people are motivated by fear. You know, a lot of Canadians are certainly a fearful bunch generally. You know, we're afraid of being cold, and it's going to be dark, and we, you know, won't have our, whatever. You know, I don't mean to ridicule y'all, but, you know, it's a learned behavior. And we also, the other thing that we did really successfully